Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. A few months ago I posted my HiFiMan Sundara review, which I consider to be one of the best, if not really the best headphone at $300 US. You might have a different opinion, and that's perfectly fine, but after weighting all the pluses and all the minuses, I still believe that they can compete or even outperform pretty much anything in that price segment. Sundara was a huge hit, and it's still one of the best-selling HiFiMan headphones of all time, and since people asked for a closed-back version, that's exactly what they did with Sundara closed back. Alright guys, so let's have a look at them and let's talk about sonics in the usual fashion. One of the biggest selling points of the original HiFiMan Sundara was the rock solid build quality, because everything was crafted from metal, yokes, structure, ear caps, everything was made from aluminum, which was great. And of course we have the same in here, with the exception that we got wooden caps, so this is real wood, which will providing you a very good seal. So the build quality is pretty solid, but if you ever owned a HiFiMan headphone by now, then you know that all of them have a slight raw and unpolished feel and look, and you know what I'm talking about. They have a detachable cable as well, with a 3.5mm termination, with an adapter to a 1/4-inch headphone jack, suggesting that you can drive these with portable or low-powered devices. Cable quality is decent, it's very flexible, but there are some microphonics when touching the cable or when rubbing against the clothing, meaning that you will need to stay still while listening to music. I would probably change it at some point, and if you need a microphonics-free cable that isn't that expensive, then APOS Flow is probably your best option right now. I find them comfortable, but there is a higher clamping force at first, and you'll need to bend them a little if you want to use them for a few hours a day. As for tech inside them, we're talking about a closed-back planar-magnetic headphone that uses stealth magnets, or more exactly, rounded magnets that don't have pointy edges, sharp corners that will remove all reflection points for a more acoustically transparent sound. The same super thin Neo drivers can be found inside. Their impedance went a little lower to 20 ohms, and that will have a positive impact on their sensitivity. Sundara was one of the easiest to drive open-back planar headphones, and Sundara closed are even more so. Having a sensitivity of 98 dB versus 94 on the original Sundara, you can indeed drive these to deafening levels with pretty much anything that has a headphone jack. Okay folks, this is pretty much it, and it's time to check how they actually perform. Sound-wise, I have some good news and some bad news to share with you. The good part is that these are sounding like a closed version of the HiFiMan Sundara. What a huge surprise. Coming with all their pluses, but also with all their minuses, all their flaws. So these are fairly neutral sounding, but also speedy, impactful, and very technical sounding. Actually, at this price point, I don't believe you can get a more technical sounding headphone than Sundara and Sundara closed. They don't have that perfect tonal balance of upper class HiFiMan headphones like Aria, like HE1000 SE, like Susvara. On the other hand, these are speedy and technical sounding, as I was saying. These are very easy to drive, so I drove them with an Xdo X2S, a very small, tiny digital audio player, and they worked just fine. They worked amazing with a Shining M3 Ultra, so again, you don't need a lot of power. They worked with USB dongles, so again, you don't need a lot of power to drive these, but they will definitely sound better with some dedicated headphone amplifiers. With desktop headphone amplifiers, these sounded slightly more dynamic, more impactful. There was a better punch in the bass, so you can improve them a little bit in that regard. The bad part about this is that these are sounding like closed back headphones, so Regardless of what are you listening to, the sounds will not try to get outside your head. They will happen mostly inside your head, regardless if you are listening to live recordings, reference recordings. Everything will sound inside your head. What was an open window towards my music felt as a closed door, because the sounds were not trying to jump, all around me. And that was felt quite instantly, because with some live recordings, I was not feeling that the depth is improving, that the width or the height of the stage is improving. So everything felt pretty much on the same level. Even if I was moving on some huge tube amplifiers, hybrid amplifiers, they still sounded inside my head. On top of that, you can feel that distortion is building up when you go a little higher on that volume, because they cannot contain the energy that is happening behind their drivers, especially if you go a little louder than 90 dB, for example. Overall, you are getting a more compact and closed-in HiFiMan Sundara sound that is making them less open and slightly more dynamic. Going a little deeper performance-wise, let's talk about dynamics, because I believe this is the only region where Sundara Closed is winning the battle versus the original Sundara. Mostly because they have a closed back design, and of course all the energy that is happening behind the drivers is coming back for another round, and it shoots directly into your eardrums for a slightly higher sound pressure level. While these won't pound your eardrums as hard like HE1000SE, like Susvara put on some legendary headphone amplifiers, these will definitely pound a little harder versus the original Sundara. And you can feel that the bass is a little bit more playful, mostly because starting with 20 Hz and upwards, there is a straight line up until 200 Hz, something that was not happening on the original Sundara, because Sundara open back is rolling off a little bit the sub bass, something that I didn't found in here, and I will prove that with my headphone measurements. While they still have that ethereal and a little lighter weight sound of the original Sundara, because they have a closed back design, all that energy, all that bass is a little thicker. So everything is a little more dynamic, a little bit more impactful, and that is happening with everything, not only with electronica tunes. But on electronica tunes, you can feel that these are keeping up with every tune. These are not losing a beat. And in terms of transit response, I don't believe you can get a better headphone than Sundara and Sundara Closed at this exact price point. With all that said, please consider that a battery-powered device like Shinling M3 Ultra won't give you 100% in terms of dynamics and transit response. You will still need a desktop headphone amplifier for some crazy wild dynamic swings. If you already have one, then please use that one for better results. The most difficult part to achieve with a closed back design is, of course, a fairly large soundstage and just contain all that energy happening behind your drivers without introducing any kind of distortion or artifacts. It's much easier said than done, because from tens of closed back headphones, I believe just a single one sounded massive without adding any kind of distortion, even at much higher volumes. And that is Kenaton Rognir Planar. That is a legendary sounding closed back headphone. Now, I will start on a positive note and say that HiFiMan Sundara Closed is not sounding, on stage like consumer level closed back headphones. It is not sounding inside your head and just tiny like Bluetooth closed back headphones, but they will feel like that when comparing them with the original HiFiMan Sundara. Now, I've tried some bigger sounding closed back headphones, but those were considerably more expensive. The cheaper ones were about 3 times the price of Sundara Closed, so of course everything has a price. These won't wow you with live music, but they won't trigger your claustrophobia. I think their staging is somewhere in the middle. It's decent enough, but not exactly huge, open and spacious by any means. Probably the biggest selling point of HiFiMan Sundara and Sundara Closed are their resolving abilities, because I believe up to $500 you cannot beat these in here. Even my co-designed APOS Caspian is not so clean, is not so detailed. Kennerton Valley, about 3 times the price, are not so impressive in here as well. Sennheiser HD 6XX family of headphones won't stand a chance versus these. Sandy Apollo, Sandy Iva won't impress you as much as these. So as you can see, any version of the Sundara or Sundara, open or closed, will just outperform all those headphones. And this is, again, as I was saying, probably the biggest selling point of the HiFiMan Sundara. These will be stealing your attention with reference recordings, and sometimes that can be a little bit too much. Personally, I would use this with a fun and warm sounding or forgiving sounding setup in detriment of an ultra-linear one. Topping gear won't work that great with these, but give them some Class A power, all discrete components, a hybrid or a tube amplifier, and these will start singing and carry you away. Moving on to frequency response, and considering that we are dealing with closed back headphones, I believe that their bass performance is just fine. From 20 Hz up until 200 Hz are being reached, there's a straight line, so everything that is happening in that region is strong, is defined. Its bass output is not so hard pounding, is not so strong like their upper class headphones like HE1000 SC or Susvara, but these will still pound a little harder versus the original Sundara. So I do believe they are doing bass just fine. It's fast, it's impactful, it's very technical, and it's very clean sounding in here. We are getting a fairly neutral mid-range that is on the lighter side, so these are not full-bodied, these are not sweet, these are not warm, creamy sounding in the mid-range, more like thin to a point of being boring sounding in the mid-range. And that's exactly I do recommend some hybrid or all tube amplifiers for the best results. If you are not into tubes, you can use something like Xduo XI10, Aoun X1S GT or Singser SA1 for some better results versus some topping or SMSL amplifiers. I personally don't like these with headphone amplifiers that use noise shaping techniques like THX AAA or NFC amplifiers that will sound quite thin and lifeless, and that's why I do recommend some warmer and smoother sounding amps. Their treble performance feels like a double-edged sword because on one hand it's detailed, it's clean, it's extended. On the other hand, there are several irregularities with the treble. For example, there are 2 massive dips in between 3 and 4 kHz and another one at 15 kHz. And I'm not talking about a 10 dB dip, but I'm talking about a 15 to 18 dB dip. So everything that is happening in that region will feel muted, just shelving a portion of detail from that region. So overall, their treble performance is fine. These are not bright, which is great, but you can certainly make them so with the wrong amplifiers. And that's why some extra care is needed when choosing the right DAC and amplifier. I also measured them, and here is their raw frequency response. And as you can see, their drivers weren't matched that well. There are several dips and rises, and the biggest ones are happening in the treble, and you can also spot a hollow mid-range performance. Their spectrogram shows a minor ringing of their caps happening in the bass region that goes worse as the volume goes up. Luckily, distortion reading is great, and at around 84 dB, there is actually very little distortion. And lastly, here is their decay, which mirrors my opinion of being a fast-sounding headphone. Long story short, a few compromises needed to be done when crafting a closed-back version of the HiFiMan Sundara, but I do think they succeeded in replicating that original Sundara sound. These are less spacious, less airy, less controlled sounding in the bass, but we're getting better dynamics and a higher sensitivity. This worked actually incredibly well with portable devices, and if you don't like spending a fortune, go with a Shining UA5 that will be giving you 100% satisfaction. If you can accept all the minuses and all the pluses, I still believe that Sundara Closed is a great sounding headphone. Okay folks, I hope you enjoyed my review. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as usual, listen to my tunes, be positive, and I'll see you soon. Cheers!